Peter Ryan is a fine example of the old maxim that a good rugby coach need not have played international or even provincial rugby. Auckland Rugby's Coach of the Year never played big rugby, but through hard work he came up through the grades as a coach with Auckland's Maris Club to win the 1994 Auckland Senior Grand Final at his first attempt. In this segment, Peter explains what difficulties that rise initially posed for him in being accepted by the team's most senior players. He tells how a willingness to pick the brains of other great players and coaches can help any aspiring coach.
I played a lot of rugby when I was younger. I played first 15 rugby and for Sacred Heart College, and when I came out of college I played senior rugby for 2 or 3 years down in Hamilton and the Waikato and in the King Country and the Manawatu. But you know, I never reached any great heights like provincial rugby or anything like that. You know, senior level was the highest level I got to. It helps when you understand what the players are going through and you understand what the players are trying to achieve. I think having played the game gives you a big understanding like that. It just makes you feel for the players. It makes you understand the players a lot more, yeah. I haven't introduced a lot of new techniques, but I was an admirer of the Australian back play over the years and getting the ball wide to the outside man, giving them space. And I've used a few techniques of, you know, running and passing and putting the man out wide in space, and hopefully it's working quite well for the side. Coaching representative football is you're coaching the cream in every position so that you're coaching the very best, and therefore you have no trouble really executing or adopting the things you want to do. When you're coaching club rugby, you're obviously limited in certain positions and the things that you can do. So you've got to really look at your overall situation with the players, and maybe you've got to play players in different positions which they would want to play in simply for the overall strength of the side, you know. So you've got to be prepared to be more adaptable coaching club rugby as opposed to coaching representative rugby. Well, you look at your composition of your team to begin with and you realise where the strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and therefore you try to fit a game plan around it. As I said, coaching rep sides, it's not a big deal because you're pretty strong in every position. Probably here at Maris we're very similar, but you may have to shift players out of familiar positions to get an overall strength, and you tend to try to play to your strengths, you know, and again, you're probably only as strong as your weakest players. So you try to lift the morale and the enthusiasm and the commitment of the weakest players, and you make them all feel very much as part of one team, so that when the team goes out on the paddock, there are no marked weak players in our squad, you know. Psychologically, they're all up there doing their best, all on an even plane, all helping one another, and, you know, no one goes out branded as a weak player or anything like that. We work on lifting that throughout the year, and so that most players, when they hit the track, are pretty confident in what they're going to do.
Keep it on, walk it up, walk it up, walk it up, walk it up, fight!
Possibly at the beginning of last year there was a little bit of reservation on the part of some of the older boys, and that's understandable too, but as the season wore on and we gelled as a team and the young fellas started to make their mark and carry their fair share of the load, they were accepted, and, you know, the team really got on with the job of winning the championship. You know, it's probably a bit like training a racehorse. You've got to understand the players. They're all different. There's 15 different personalities. You've got to learn to their psyche, learn to what makes them tick, what makes them want to do things, what puts them off doing things, and then trying to gel it all together for the important occasions. Yeah. So I've never trained with assistants or coached with assistants in the past. But I find you have to be very careful as to the people that you choose to be assistants. You know, assistant coaches are a special breed of person. They've got to be very understanding individuals. They've got to be compliant. They've got to have a feel for what you're trying to achieve and aid and abet that. And as I said, they're a very special sort of people. You can get trapped with assistants that tend to want to do things or take over as the main role and things like that, and therefore it's defeating, they can be possibly defeating the purposes which you're trying to achieve. So, you know, I in the past have tended to favour getting guys along when I want help in specialty situations. I might want people to look at my front rows. I'll get a front row forward like Kevin Boyle or someone like that to come along and give me a hand. If I want guys to help me with my loose forwards, I can get fellas like Zinny Brook or Pat Lamb or someone to give me a hand. And particularly at Marist, you've got so much talent here and so much expertise that it's not hard drawing on everyone's intelligence and experience and that. But Bernie's that special sort of guy. You know, this year I found that last year I probably spread myself too much trying to cover the whole 15. So I asked Bernie to come and give me a hand, and he's really doing a wonderful job with the backs, and he's excellent to work with, and he probably knows more about back play than I do at any rate. I was a back myself in my playing days, and I probably tended to favour back coaching when I first started, but I made a deliberate point in my early coaching days to learn as much as I could about forward play. I did all the coaching schools at Auckland here. I concentrated on getting tutored by the coaching experts like Andy Hayden and Grant Dixon and all those guys, listening to what they had to say, and I really made it my business to make a study of forward play, and I have studied forward play very, very hard over the last 6 to 7 years, 8 years, you know, and therefore it comes back, you know, like you don't always need a lot of experience at actually playing in a particular situation. If you understand the game and you've played the game per se, you know, you can pick up and learn very, very, very well, and I'd like to think I've probably done that with the forwards, you know. It's hard to quantify in percentages, but certainly man management is an important part of coaching. You can have all the expertise and all the technique in the world, but if you can't excite the players or stimulate the players to want to do it, it's not going to work for you. I mean, we should be smarting. I mean, the press virtually wrote us off. They've said that Ponsonby's got the trophy. I mean, it's very easy to write Ponsonby. It's popular. Everyone wants to write them. But it's, you know, but you guys are a better team than that. And you have the ability to do that on Saturday. So we'll go and do it. Okay, thank you, Barton, for your contribution. I've always worked on the principle at coaching of laying the foundation, giving the guys the opportunity, creating the environment for them to want to perform and show their skills and enjoy it and show their class. You know, if you can create that environment in players, their ability and their natural class will do wonders for you. Obviously, then you've got to bring your impression on the game, you've got to bring your style to the game, and you've got to be sure of that within yourself, and therefore you have to know your technique and you have to know your game plans and your strategies. But certainly, as I said earlier on, if the environment is not there for the players to want to perform, all the technique and all the game plans and strategies can amount to nothing. You know, they have to have that environment where they want to enjoy themselves and do well.
Peter Ryan's ability to motivate his team to championship honours is now unquestioned. But for the views of a real specialist in this vital area of a team's preparation, we now turn to sports psychologist Craig Lewis.
A lot of the rugby players take a little bit of time to come to grips with the sort of psychological skills that you're trying to develop. Basically, very few of them have had much of a role to play in their own development. They've tended to rely on the coach to do that, so they haven't really been empowered to make those sort of decisions. And that makes it difficult for them to develop their own skills as an elite player, because really it becomes their responsibility to do that. And I find that a lot of them tend to rely heavily on the coach to set the goals, which is fine, but the problem with that tends to be that, I mean, they achieve those goals, but those goals are not really stretching their limits. And I think it's important that the athlete needs to understand their role in setting the goals. And when they understand that role, the goals that they set tend to be a lot higher and still tend to be attained. So from my experiences, I think at a junior level there needs to be a lot more emphasis placed on empowering young athletes or young rugby players to make those sort of decisions. But I tend to find that the exact opposite occurs, probably more so in rugby, from my experiences, than in most other sports. And I don't really know why that is.
Stop, Cassie!
Optimal arousal basically revolves around the athlete's perception of challenge and their perception of ability. So if the two marry off, you tend to have an athlete who is optimally aroused and things tend to flow. When an athlete competes under-aroused, it tends to be because they have a high perception of their ability but actually can't read challenge in the situation that they find themselves in. So in that circumstance, they go out and tend to play a little bit lethargic. Alternatively, if you have an athlete who perceives an enormous challenge, like a club player going to play representative rugby, then you're likely to have a high perception of challenge and really quite a low perception of ability, and that athlete will compete anxious. So the key really is to get some consistency between your perception of challenge and your perception of ability. And obviously the way to do that is to perceive challenge internally. So the athlete has to see the challenge as being them performing the skills of their game, and that way the two will always marry off. Symptoms of over-arousal, I mean, there's quite a lot of things that you would consider to be correlates of stress. The obvious ones, are the urge to urinate is an obvious one, sweaty palms, increased heart rate, all those sort of things tend to be more tangible ways of seeing that an athlete's a little bit anxious. Other things are self-doubt, starting to doubt the value of performing, the value of the sport. All those sort of things tend to indicate that the athlete might be a little bit anxious at the time of competition. Under-arousal tends to be more just basic lethargy, no real determination in preparation really, just really a matter of just rolling along and not really recognising the significance of the event. For me, I tend to find athletes who compete under-aroused tend to have done very little forethought about the game itself. So when they go out to compete, they really don't have any structures or any routines to work to. Whereas an athlete who's well prepared tends to have those sort of things, not only in their head, but generally speaking, written out as well. I think the first thing is it's very important for the coach to recognise that his athletes need to be attending to controllable things in their performance. So that's the specifics of how they perform, the skills of the game. Once you've done that, then you should have a consistency across the board for having an athlete who is perceiving challenge. Okay, because the challenge is always from within. When an athlete starts to attend to things that are uncontrollable, then that will tend to create anxiety. So a coach's talk that highlights specifically the excellence of the opponent, the weather conditions, the refereeing, all those sort of things will tend to create an anxiety in an athlete. So the coach's team talk needs to be primarily focused around the things that he wants his players to attend to.
You all know what you've got to do. You all know your roles. You're all smarting from last week.
Coming! Head up! Coming! Head up!
Let's use it. Let's use that call forwards. Every scrum time we use it. Don't just go in here and forget about it when you get out there, Levy. Patrick, concentrate. Get low.
I think one of the main areas that coaches fall down with their team talk is that they try to provide too much information. I mean, an athlete competing, or a person generally, will probably be able to attend to about 6 or 7 things at a time. In a stress situation like competitive sport, you're probably looking at about 2 or 3 things. So a coach who goes out there and delivers a talk for about 10 or 15 minutes, highlighting a number of areas, is likely to have his players switch off pretty immediately. So the important thing, I think, in your team talk is to say 2 or 3 things, but just keep reiterating them and reiterating them. And then the players will understand what's required of them. You know, it's specific things like making sure that you're working hard to get to the breakdown, working in pairs, running in pairs, perhaps specific things to do with the line out. Perhaps your halfback, you might be highlighting the need for him to call early. You might be talking to your first five about the need to see the vision, have the vision to see how his backline is set up. Just anything like that, but just highlighting very specific things. In actual fact, a lot of that really should be done or could be done individually with each player, so that when you bring the team together collectively, you talk about 2 or 3 things that the team, as a team, must try and attend to. But a lot of what you want to get through to your players is best done sometime away from game time on an individual basis, so that the player can actually understand what's required of them in that game. The important thing with peaking is to make sure that your athletes are concentrating on their own controllable things. So they're concentrating on the specifics of their performance, the actual skills that they need to display when they play. So the coach should always be trying to highlight those things to his team. I think you've got to accept that in a long season, athletes are going to actually have periods where they're not performing to their optimum. And that's fine. I mean, the important thing in those situations is to be able to address them and allow the athletes to understand why they're not performing the way they want to perform. So quite often you'll find with a team that starts very well will go through a slump mid-season, and that is basically because they no longer can see challenge in what they're doing, and that's because they're looking at the opponent for the challenge. So if you find you're in that situation, it's important to sit down with your athletes and explain to them that the main reason why they are struggling is because they have ceased to see challenge in their own performance and are seeing challenge in the opponents who basically to date have proven not to be quite as good as them. So that's an important thing for coaches to recognise, is that you know it is feasible that teams are going to go through slumps. In fact, it's very unusual for a team not to. The important thing is how you react to that. I think what you should be doing is you should be getting your athletes to actually sit down and write down the things that they want to achieve in each particular game, setting their own goals, the goals that are related to their specific performance, not related to scores and not related to outcomes, but just related to them doing the things that they know are important in their game. I think once you get your athletes onto that sort of a level, you're going to find that consistency will come as a matter of course. So it really is just a matter of getting onto things very early, talking it through and developing strategies or routines that are going to allow you to once again emphasise the controllable nature of their performance. Because once an athlete feels they're in control, then they will start to perform the way they want to perform. I think it's very important that your athletes also recognise that criticism is there so that they can develop. And I think if you don't emphasise that at any point in time early in your season, then it's very easy for your players to be hurt by criticism. But it is important that everybody in the team recognises that the criticism the coach offers and the other team members offer are offered because they want to see the team and the individual develop. I think one of the things that I don't believe coaches generally across the board, not just in rugby but in any sport, are not terribly good at, and that is recognising effort and emotion. If you can recognise effort in your players, regardless of outcome, then you're likely to get the sort of consistency that you want. Too many of us tend to praise result and regardless of performance. So for a team who performs poorly but still wins, we tend to find that coaches will see that as a good performance, whereas in actual fact the performance itself was poor. So you need to be constantly highlighting the effort of the player, and in that way that will make the player more internally focused on their own performance when they go out to perform. I think the most important thing that the coach has to recognise is that the motivation that they're seeking actually comes from the sort of goals that the athlete is going to set. So if the athlete is setting goals on a very short-term basis, like a weekly basis, I mean, with the athletes that I work with, we look to set